Hello, and welcome to this webinar about auto actions. Today, we will cover what auto actions are, triggers of the auto actions, the actions an auto action can perform, and at the end, we will have some time for questions and answers. What is an auto action? An auto action is a small program inside the Bets24 system that will monitor your bookings to see if they meet some trigger conditions. If a booking does meet all the trigger conditions that you set in the auto action, then the auto action will perform a specific action that you set. Now let's have a look at the triggers of the auto action. I will start with the time trigger, which I believe are the most important. The trigger event, this setting here, it works together with the trigger time and the time window setting. This determines when the auto action will trigger. Then we have the trigger time. The trigger time works together with the trigger event. It sets the time relative to the trigger event when the action should first trigger. Okay, so a positive value is after the event, and a negative value is before the event. Obviously, a negative value in combination with the trigger event booking is not valid because we cannot trigger an auto action before a booking is even made. The trigger time window sets the period the action is allowed to trigger. So after the trigger time window has elapsed, the action will no longer trigger. The trigger time window begins at the initial trigger time. Now, between bookings and check-in is a setting that allows you to trigger an auto action for bookings made a certain number of days before check-in. Then we also have the check-in from and check-in to, which you can fine-tune to trigger only bookings between these specific date ranges with the check-in. Now let's have a look at the booking source. Booking source allows you to specify or to which channels this auto action will trigger. For example, if you want an auto action to trigger only for Booking.com bookings, then you would choose Booking.com. You can choose multiple booking sources, for example, Booking.com, Airbnb, and Expedia. So the auto action would trigger only for these three channels. Now, booking conditions, info codes, and booking fields are triggers that trigger based on information that is inside the booking. Except for the group booking trigger. This setting will actually change the behavior of your auto action depending if it's a group booking or not. So you can make a trigger on all the bookings. If it's a group booking, you can make a trigger only on the master booking and not on the secondary bookings. So it is important that when you are in doubt, please click on the context help to read the specifications of the set. Okay. Now, info codes are used to make the auto action trigger based on an info code inside the booking. If you have seen my previous webinar about reports, we already talked about info codes. So if there is a specific info code inside the booking, for example, breakfast or a check-in time, then you can make the auto action trigger or not based on the info codes that are inside the booking. Another example would be if you have two auto actions and you want one specific auto action to trigger after the other. To make sure that this happens is auto action 1 triggers on the booking normally, and it sets an info code inside the booking. Once the info code is set, auto action 2 would only trigger if the info code exists inside the booking. Now, the booking fields are very similar to auto actions, but you can actually choose the field inside the booking that you want to use. For example, let's say you receive a booking from Booking.com for a specific rate plan which includes breakfast. Now you would choose here then let me see, API message, which is normally where Booking.com sets the information about the rate plan, and you need to check the rate plan ID. So once you know the rate plan ID, let's say the rate plan ID for breakfast is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So what we are doing here basically is that this auto action would trigger if the booking field contains on the API message field the rate plan 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And thus you would be able to trigger this specific auto actions only for those specific bookings with that specific rate plan. Last but not least, properties, rooms, and unit. It's quite self-explanatory. You can trigger the auto action on specific properties, on properties that are only owned by your account, or on properties that are visible in account. Again, I'm not going to go too far into these details, but click on the context help and have a look at the help pages to see how this exactly works. Okay, so the rooms, you can choose which room, if it's a specific property, which room you want it to trigger. Exclude room IDs if you have a property with multiple rooms and you don't want the auto action to trigger for some specific rooms or not. So basically that's it for the auto action triggers. My advice would be, before you set up an auto action, try to figure out what do you want to see inside the booking, so that you can set up the booking conditions, the info codes, and the booking field triggers. So based on information that you have in the booking, the auto action will trigger. And then the most important, when you want the auto action to trigger, which you set here on the trigger times. Now let's check the actions an auto action can perform. Obviously, we can send messages to your customers. So this would be for email, or you see here plain text message, because we can also send a message using the messaging API for some channels like Booking.com or Airbnb. Now, it is important that for those channels, when you do not receive an email from the guest and you are using the messaging API, you do need to set the message that you want to set in plain text message. This is the only way it will get through the messaging API and go to your customer. Okay. Then we can also send SMS messages. So you will need to enable the SMS message. Phone number, you can use a template variable, or you can use a fixed phone number, and then the message. Then the booking tab will actually make some little changes into the booking. Like it can change the booking status, it can change the booking substatus, you can set a flag text, flag color, status code, or change the room unit status of the book. Booking info will insert booking info codes or remove info codes from the booking. So the example I gave before, to insert info code into the booking for the first auto action, this is where you would insert. So booking info code would be auto action 1, and then OK. So if this booking info code is inside the booking, then the second auto action would trigger if it would contain the booking info code. So basically, by setting here any information, the system will set and create the info code inside the booking. Then we have the invoice tab, which you can use to set invoice items, or you can also use to add a pending payment. Okay, pending payments, I'm not going to go into this, but you can create pending payments to charge a guest credit card automatically. So yes, you can use auto actions to automate the payments of your bookings. Then we have the webhooks tab, which we can use, and this is a little bit more advanced. You can use this to actually send a webhook to your web server or to your, external service, so that it can trigger. You can send booking information, a guest name. It's free for you to set here, and you can use template variables to do this. And then last one is a test tab, which you can use to see all the bookings that fall within the auto action, or if you have a booking that did not trigger and you want to find out why the booking did not trigger on the auto action, you can put in the booking number here, do a test, and it will show you the result of why the auto action did not trigger on that booking. Now let's try out some examples. Let's trigger some auto actions. I will try out with a very, very simple example, which is trigger an auto action every time a booking is made. And when you receive a booking in the system, the auto action is supposed to trigger immediately. Now let's put this on bookings and immediate. So this means that immediately after a booking is received, the auto action will trigger. Let's check also everything is blank. So this basically will trigger for any booking that is made. And now let's go to the booking. Put here the flag color to yellow. So whenever a booking is made, the auto action will change the color of the booking to yellow. Let's enable this, put it on automatic, save. Now let's go to our calendar. We create new booking. Save this. Refresh, and now we have to wait a little bit. Auto actions can take up to 20 minutes to trigger, sometimes a little bit more. It really depends on the queue or not. What we can do is what I showed you before. Let's go open. Let's first take the booking ID. We go to the auto action, open the auto action, and we can actually see if this booking falls inside there. This is the booking ID. It falls inside the auto action. So this auto action will trigger on the booking. Okay. Let's say if it wouldn't, we can put in here the booking ID, do a test, and we would see this one here is not yet triggered. So the auto, it is already in queue. The auto action will trigger in this booking. It's just a matter of waiting a little bit. Now let me give you an example where I know that the auto action would not trigger, which is this booking that was already made. John Doe, we take the booking ID. Now, obviously, this is not inside the view bookings here for potential bookings. And when we check the trigger test tool, we can see booking does not allow auto actions, because trigger event is after booking. So this means the booking was already made when we created the auto action, and we said, hey, so when a new booking comes in, trigger the auto action. So this booking falls outside the trigger event. That's why it would not trigger. Now there's a simple little trick you can do to make actually the auto action trigger on that booking. So the booking was already made when we created this auto action. So what we can do is we set a higher time window. Let's say we don't know when the booking was made. Let's put it on the maximum 999 days. So we save. Now let's have a look at the auto action test, view bookings, and we can see here, Django. Now the auto action will trigger also on this booking that was created before we created the auto action. And we set up the auto action to trigger on new bookings. So because we have raised the time window, this is the amount of time the auto action is allowed to trigger, we also are including bookings in the past. Now let's have a look and check if the auto action is actually there, it triggered. So the auto action changed the booking color from red into yellow, because this is what we set the auto action to do. We can actually check here under mail and actions. We can see for the booking, the auto action, which is the auto action that we created, is done now. It changed the color of the booking, the flag color, into yellow. Now, when we check this booking now, that falls also inside the auto action, it has not yet changed. When we check the mail and action tabs, we can see that the auto action is pending. So the auto action should trigger any moment now, also for this booking. Now let's have a look at another example. We are going to trigger in this example an auto action based on very, very specific information. I'm going to use the example I already taught before. Let's say we receive a booking from booking.com that includes a meal. Let's just use a bed and breakfast. Now, with booking.com and also other channels, when there is a meal plan included, there are two ways you can actually identify this. You can identify this in the API message inside the booking. So this should be on the details on the API message, but you can also identify this on the rate description using the rate code. Normally booking.com rate code includes or not a meal plan. So if a booking is made with a specific rate code, it can include a meal. So you can use the rate code ID to identify if it's a bed and breakfast, if it's half board or full board or any other information. So I can, because I'm not connected to booking.com, I can't really import booking from booking.com with that information, but I copied something from another booking. And this is basically what we receive from booking.com on the rate description. In this case, as you can see, this is the booking.com rate ID, and it's a non-refundable rate plan from booking.com. So I'm going to, let's say this is a meal plan instead of non-refundable, it's for bed and breakfast. Now I'm going to use this rate plan. Let me copy that, save, and I'm gonna go here to the, let's create a new, let me see, we create a new auto action, put in BB, put it on automatic, let's do it booking, immediate, raise this so it will trigger on all the bookings, on the both bookings that we have. But here, then on the booking field contains, we are going to use here rate description. We are going to put here the rate plan. So by doing this, we are actually saying this auto action to trigger on all the bookings, but that have this specific rate plan. And if it triggers, what we are going to do is we are going to insert an info code saying meal plan, then BB. So it's going to insert an info code in our booking. The info code will read meal plan and the info code text BB for bed and breakfast. Let's save this. Now let's refresh, open. We are going to check, and there, it's the booking that has the specific meal plan. So now let's have a look at the booking. It can take some time again, obviously, for this auto action to trigger on the booking. It has not yet triggered, but we can actually it's on pending. We can manual trigger auto action. Let's just do it. Do now, say trigger, and we go when we check info codes, meal plan BB. This is what would happen. It would not be necessary to trigger this manually. I just did it so that you can see what happens and how the system sets an info code. So the info code, as you can read here, info code text and booking info code and the info code text. Okay, so booking info code is the first piece of information, and the info code text is the second piece of information, which you can also add info codes manually. I already have this here, cash payment, let's say they paid 200. Now you have an info code, cash payment 200. Now, in this particular example, it is important to understand that you are making the auto action trigger on very specific bookings with very specific information. There are no limits on how many auto actions you can have, but each auto action needs to have its own trigger conditions. Now let's have a look at a little bit more complex auto action. What we are going to do now is create an auto action to set an info code so that it can calculate the price per person or average price per person. So what we are going to do is use an info code for this purpose. In the previous webinar about reports, we already talked about the info codes, and as you know, info codes are quite powerful, and you can use them in standard reports to filter out bookings and check some booking, very specific booking information with this piece of information that you can set into your booking. Now, what we are going to do is calculate the price per person. So let's give this let me check here, price per guest name, and then booking info text. We are going to do the calculation under the booking info text. So when we run a report, we would run a report and run the report only for bookings that would have the price per guest, so that we can see only those bookings and we can see the values. The value would be the booking info text. Now, the value for this auto action will be a calculation, which is invoice charges divided by number of people. Now let's put this on auto. We put here price per guest. Let's configure our triggers. Now, we only have 2 bookings in the calendar, so we already know how we want to trigger this. Let me give you another example. One of the bookings, I believe, would be for check-in on the 13th. So I'm on 10. Let's do check-in minus 3 days. It should trigger. For me, this auto action should trigger at least on Jane Doe booking, because I've now set this auto action to trigger 3 days before check-in. Okay, and what it will do is it will check the invoice charges. Let me check for Jane Doe. It's 100, and divide that by the number of guests, which is 2 guests. Let's save this. Then we open it up. We go to the test, view bookings. There, Jane Doe is here. So when we open now the booking of Jane Doe, we will see that the auto action should be here on pending. We are not going to wait for the system. I'll just do the auto action now. And then when we go check the info, we see that we have a new info code, price per guest, 50. 50 because the full price was 100. 100 divided by 2 is 50, obviously. Now, I want to go through one more example or one more topic, which is payment requests or pending payments. Now, pending payments and payment requests are 2 totally different things. A pending payment is an automated payment, so the system will actually automatically, or it can automatically charge a guest credit card. It is important to note that for pending payments, you need to use Stripe. This is required. If you don't use Stripe, you cannot set a pending payment. Also, it is important that you have the guest credit card already in the booking. So if there's no credit card, the system cannot charge anything. Now, a pending payment in Euro, due to this new SCA rules, not all cards might work. In fact, many cards might actually fail on a pending payment because of the new strong customer authentication rules. Now, if a pending payment fails, then you can actually create or set up another auto action to do a payment request. Now, a payment request is we send an email to your guest using an auto action with an URL so that your guest can make a payment. And now the payment can be with any enabled payment gateways that you have here. Okay. Now let's have a look at how to set a pending payment. It's quite easy. Now, and I'm going to make this example. So at first, when a booking comes in, we create a pending payment. If the pending payment fails, then we need to trigger another auto action so that it sends a payment request. Okay, it sounds tricky, but it isn't really. Let's assume we want to insert a pending payment immediately after the booking. So very simple, immediately after the booking, we insert a pending payment into the booking. So the invoice we do for a fixed amount. Let's just keep it simple. Description is payment room. Amount, let's do 200. Payment rule, we put it on auto. Payment due, let's do it on check-in. So payment due, this is quite self-explanatory. When is payment due? We just do it on check-in. So on check-in, the system will charge 200 euros from the guest credit card. That's it. That's the only thing that we need to set for a very simple and straightforward pending payment. Now, if this pending payment fails, I can't really show you. I can't really trigger any of this. Let me check here. Let's go here to this pending payment. Do now. Yeah, pending payment, which will trigger on the 13th of August. Now, obviously, this pending payment will not work because I don't have Stripe enabled in this account, and there is no credit card. So even if I do charge now, payment failed, obviously. Now, we can take advantage of that, a payment failed. In this case, because I'm not connected to Stripe, no info code is set here. But if you're connected to Stripe and the payment fails in Stripe, then you will see here a new info code, which is something like Stripe card failed. And you can use that info code to trigger secondary auto action if necessary, obviously, to actually send the payment request to your guest. Okay, so the secondary auto action would be something like we would set this to on booking immediate, and we would raise this amount here. Let's put it on 99 days. So this will constantly keep monitoring all bookings. And now what we need to do to make sure that this auto action only sends a payment request to your guest is if there is a booking info code, which is I'm not sure what the exact word is, but if you open up a booking and you see something like Stripe card failed, then this is the info code that will trigger this auto action. And then we would put in a message here. You can do a plain text message and an HTML message and send a URL to your customer to make the payment, or update the card details, send you new card details. So as you can see, using info codes and set two, you can use 2, 3, 4, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many auto actions you can use. You can use 3, 4 auto actions on the same booking, as long as they check for something different or the same way. It really depends on what you want to do with an auto action. And so I come back to what I already said before. Before you set up an auto action, you need to think about what you want to do. What should this auto action do? And when should it take action? When does it need to trigger? What does it need to find in the booking? What change do you need to see in the booking for the auto action to trigger? For example, this will only trigger if there's a specific info code in the auto action, but you can also trigger auto actions if there are, for example, a payment is made. So invoice balance, let's say you have here any payment made. So this auto action will now trigger, is now ready to trigger for any bookings where a payment is made. So if a guest makes a payment to your booking, it triggers the auto action. You can send them a message thanking the guest about the payment. Now, as you can see, auto actions, it might sound quite complex to set them up, but really they're not. Think about how you want to set them up. How does the auto action need to trigger for you? On what conditions does it need to trigger? And then that's it. That's the only thing. And then obviously the actions that it needs to take, but this is really up to you to set to your liking. Now, one thing that I failed to mention at the beginning of this webinar, the messaging for the auto actions, if you're sending a message or to the email of your guest, it is important that you set the outgoing email in your account. Without the outgoing email, the messaging, the emails of auto actions to your guests will not work. Also, auto actions trigger, you can specify times here on the trigger. So auto actions trigger based on your time zone. Let's say you want to trigger an auto action 1 day before check-in. If I do this, so minus 1 day, 1 day before check-in, this will trigger at midnight, because it's 0 hours, midnight at the time zone that I set under my account. Okay, so if I want this auto action to trigger around 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning, I would need to set here midnight plus 9 would be 9 o'clock in the morning, based on my account time zone. Now keep in mind that some customers use sub accounts, and in this sub accounts you can have different time zones. When you set up a auto action, make sure you keep into account what time zone the account is, so that you can correctly set it for the time that you want the auto action to trigger. So that is it about auto actions. I hope it is a little bit more clear to you how auto actions work and how you can make them trigger for specific bookings or for all your bookings. Now let's go over to some questions and answers.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar with Uri today with regards to auto actions. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to add your question to the chat box. We'll be happy to take your questions and provide some answers. Okay, just had one here, Uri. So let's imagine you set up 5 auto actions, but you want for one specific booking, stop 1 out of the 5. Want for one specific booking, stop 1 out of the 5 auto actions, how to do it. Francois, I'm not very sure exactly what it is you want, what the question is. Can you clarify? If you want, you can unmute yourself and ask the question on the call.
Sorry, I think I answered a ticket about this some time ago, and I actually made an example out of this. So if you want a specific auto action to stop like a series, let's say you have 5 auto actions and you want a second auto action to stop the following auto actions, you can do that using info codes. So if an auto action runs it would actually set an info code inside the booking saying auto action 2 okay. So you would have auto action 1 okay, auto action 2 okay, and auto actions 3 and 4 would only run if there is the info code of the previous auto action inside the booking. So if there is no info code inside the booking, let's say auto action 3 needs to check if there is an info code for auto action 2 in the booking. If this is not there, then auto action 3 would stop. It doesn't mean that auto action 4 would need to stop. You can choose which info codes you want the auto action to stop. Would that answer your question? Okay, if you can send us a support ticket explaining exactly how you want this to work, and perhaps give me an example of what you already have, then I can answer you this. I can put together an example and answer you this on the ticket.
Okay, thank you for that. So we have another question. Could you demo an auto action for sending a guest remote lock access codes in an email only after successful payment is made?
That is, yeah, that's easy. I think one of the last examples I gave in this webinar was exactly trigger an auto action if a payment is made. You can actually fine tune the auto action to trigger if the full payment is made, and then send them an email to your guest. But send us a support ticket with this question. I can create a demo of this and send it to you.
Martin, what you would need to do is in the trigger tab of the auto action, you can use the value that says invoice balance. And if you use that one, you can say either any payment made or no payment. So you can use that to actually refine the trigger items, as Uri has said, to be able to only trigger and only send the access codes in an email once there's been either full payment or any payment made. You can use the invoice balance in the trigger tab for that. Okay, any other questions? Thanks, Martin. There's lots of, in the auto actions wiki page, there's also lots of examples of auto actions and the types of things that you can use, that if you don't have specific information, examples there, or as Uri has already said, you're welcome to send a specific support ticket if you have specific requirements that you don't see examples for in the wiki page. Hi, Kana, do you have a question? Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, hello, good morning. Do you hear me? Yeah,
Yes.
good morning. Thank you for this brilliant demo. Actually, I had just to ask you, maybe if you could re-explain the answer regarding the question of Martin, which is related to remote lock access code. I did not get the answer properly.
Okay, so if you want to send, an email to your guests only after a successful payment has been made. Is that the part you didn't understand?
No, that's not the part that I didn't understand. It's about the remote lock access code. Actually, I want to send a code giving access to my, giving the code to my guests to access the apartment, right? Then this is the first thing. The second one is I want to generate this code after using an external application. Is there any possibility to link the auto action to this external application in order to generate the code?
Yes. You don't actually link the auto action to an external application. It's actually you need to find a way using the API to set this code inside your booking. Okay, I would say using an info code would be best. So you can develop some kind of tool to create a code and set that inside your booking, and then the auto action trigger the auto action once the payment is made, and the auto action would then send the code that is generated to your guest.
Okay.
Kana, let me jump in here. Maybe I missed something, but this functionality is built into Beds24. Are you using remote log via the apps and integrations menu in Beds24?
Okay.
Yeah, so Beds24 has an integration with remote log. You can set the integration up in settings, apps and integrations, remote log. And when you click on the help page for remote log, you will find information on how to then set up the auto action. There is an info code which you can use. I'm just going to put it in the chat. In the chat.
Okay.
It's booking info cortex log state pin. So that's the template variable that you need to put into your email, in your email template, and that will send the pin to your guest.
Okay.
And as Yuri said, if you want to restrict the sending of this message, you can, in the auto action, you can set that it should only trigger if a payment was made.
Okay. Okay, I got it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Okay, any other questions? You're welcome to either write the questions in the chat box or unmute yourself and just ask the question on the call just now, if that helps anyone. Nope, don't see any more questions. Thanks, Rudy.
So it was my pleasure. Hope you enjoyed the webinar. Looking forward for the next one.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hello.
Have a nice day. Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.